Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Gracia, and I am a third year political science international development student at U of T. And today I will be coordinating a session with David Lee, and I am a member of Pre-Law Shadowers. It is an organization dedicated to educating students and helping them on their legal career journeys. And so today we have here David with us. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Gracia. Thank you for having me. As said, my name is David Lee. I'm a lawyer practicing at Blackburn Lawyers. I've been practicing law for just over 5 years now, and I've been at this firm for the majority of my career. I presently practice civil litigation with a emphasis on medical malpractice and estate litigation.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna get right started. Sorry. The first question is gonna be, at what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to pursue a legal career?
So initially, when I was in my undergrad, I had an interest in going to med school, not for any particular reason other than I kind of liked science when I was in high school. And after going to university, taking some client science classes, I realized it wasn't for me. It was a lot of memorizing of enzymes and genes, and it was just not interesting for me anymore. Uh, at that point, I started exploring what other options there were. I switched from a biomedical major to a psychology major for the main reason I just liked psychology. But as I went along in my studies, I realized that wasn't interested in practicing in clinical psychology or doing anything really related to the psychology field as much as I enjoyed the studies. So I started looking around, and I was lucky enough that I was able to work on a very volunteer part-time basis at a law firm. So I got to experience what it looked like to be a lawyer. I got to follow some lawyers to some of their hearings. And that's really what sparked my interest in advocacy. And from, I would say, probably my third year university, that's when I decided law was what I wanted to do.
Great. So in your third year, while you were studying psychology, in addition to the part-time work at the law firm, do you think there were any particular courses that you took at Waterloo, was it? Um,
Yes.
yeah, that, helped you or maybe, also ignited that spark of wanting to study law?
Yeah. Well, there wasn't any course in particular. I tried to take any law course that I could. And at the time, Waterloo didn't have any kind of pre-law classes available to them. They had a partnership with Laurier. So I was able to take a couple legal introductory courses through Laurier that was tied with the Waterloo School as well. But otherwise, really, the practical experience that I sought out going to court to watch lawyers. And I was really fortunate that a good family friend of mine, he was a practicing lawyer at the time. So just getting out there and seeing what it looked like, that's what really informed my decision to go to law school. But to be quite frank, if I were to put third year university David in this seat right now, I was uncertain whether or not law was what I wanted to do. All I knew was I wanted to do something post graduating from my undergrad, and law seemed to be a good fit. And it was through a lot of conversations with other lawyers and my family and other people who supported me, who gave me guidance on my values are. And I think it's what my values were is what really made me decide to go to law. And I determined that what I really valued was advocacy. I wanted to help people, and it seemed like being a lawyer was the place a lawyer could do that.
No, that's a great motivator. Definitely probably one of the most honest motivators as well. And so kind of different direction, but so when it came to, when you decided that you wanted to go to law, was it straight after your undergrad?
It was probably in my third year when I realized I wanted to go to law school, I started preparing for my LSATs. And I actually wrote the LSAT for the first time in my third year, not for any other reason that I knew that I just wanted to try it. So I didn't do well the first time I did it. It was a great learning experience, and that was mainly the point, just to see what it was looking like. So when I tried in my fourth year again, I would be more prepared because I knew I had 3 shots at it every 2 years. So I made sure I took all 3 shots. First one was in third year, and then the other two were in my fourth year's studies.
Great. So how was that process of studying LSATs, juggling it with school and I don't were you working like the law firm at the same time and all of that?
Sure. So when I say working at the law firm, I guess to make it realistic, I was when I wasn't sitting in the gallery in a courthouse or just in a chair in a boardroom listening to what the lawyers were doing, really the majority of my job was scanning. I also mowed the lawn at the law firm. So, you do what you can to be useful because you don't have a law degree. So there's not a lot you can do other than scanning, but it was an opportunity to get inside the boardrooms and the courtrooms just to listen. But I did not play any active role. And that was only when I was only in the summers. So during the year, my full time focus was on school, and balancing the LSAT studies was a challenge at first, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I purchased some of the LSAT exam prep books. I casually worked through some of the questions. I ran through some of the tests, and only to learn that when you're actually in the real exam, it's a very different circumstance. And that's where I learned the value of getting a coach to help tutor me in bringing my mark up to what I thought would be an acceptable LSAT score, and also taking a class, which I took. But I think the most important one was I went to a private coach, LSAT coach at U of T, who was a former law graduate. And that really helped me learn the inside, I guess, the workarounds with the games and how to prep effectively. And it also made me accountable to make sure that when I was doing the practice tests, I was doing them in real time as opposed to a casual time, which I think anyone who's preparing for their LSATs will understand that if you have an infinite amount of time, you can do great. But when you're under the gun, that's when you fall apart.
Yeah, definitely a working under pressure experience. So when you did, do your LSAT and everything, and you did go to school, how was your law school experience?
It was good. I went to the University of Windsor, and I really enjoyed it. Every law school has their own culture, and I particularly liked Windsor's culture. I got accepted into a couple different universities, but I chose Windsor because it had an emphasis on social justice. And at the time, that was what I really valued, and I still do. But that's what drew me there. And also, I wanted to be at a university that was, close enough to home. So it wasn't over a 4-hour drive. Windsor's a 3-hour drive from where I live in Toronto, and but far enough that the majority of the students are going to be also living in the area. So you have a real sense of culture there because there's not as many commuter students, which commuter students are great, but when you're forced to live together, you tend to form strong bonds as well because you become each other's family when you're far enough away from your own family.
Um, so you love the culture of the school, the environment, and what about the academics themselves? Were there any courses specifically in your law school that you really liked and enjoyed?
Yeah. My first year of law school was the standard legal courses, which are mandatory. You have property law, contract law, you have constitutional law, and they're great overall summaries of different broad areas of law. When it got interesting was in my second and third year when you had a little more control over the courses that you took. One of my favorite courses at Windsor was a civil trial advocacies course that was run by one of the judges in Windsor. And it was a practical course, which is unique to a lot of courses, where you were examined on your ability to perform a mock trial. So having lawyers there to help teach real oral advocacy around a big set of facts really hones your advocacy skills. It's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to be a courtroom lawyer, but for those who do, like myself, that was really interesting to me, and I learned a lot, and it was memorable. I did an exchange while I was there to a university in Switzerland, and that gave me a unique opportunity to take some terrorism and the law courses, international trade law, human rights law, from some of the professors there. So that was interesting as well. But I also took a crash course, which was a 2-week intensive at Windsor, which was a negotiations course. And we got to, again, do a practical workshop on negotiating, and it was around renegotiating NAFTA was our assignment. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. As a student right now, I sometimes feel like, your courses, they're very like, oh, exams, readings, essays and stuff. And so it's nice like to hear that like law schools are, it may not be like common, but that there's some options sometimes to have like more practical, like mock uh assignments and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So, in your area, you do civil litigation, medical malpractice. So, what do you like most about, the field that you're in?
I like the I like the opportunity to interact with my clients frequently. That's what I enjoy, and I like the challenge of both areas of law. Uh, I have the opportunity to be in court quasi frequently, have trials for different areas. So that's the reason why I chose litigation in general. I wanted to be giving submissions before a judge. I liked that part of being a lawyer, and preparing for court, doing examinations of witnesses. Those are all things that I enjoyed. And I felt it was a real opportunity to, I think you're going to hear the word frequently, but hone my advocacy skills, as opposed to doing some other legal work, which might be a bit more solicitor based in terms of drafting documents, contracts, agreements. While those can be interesting in and of itself, I like being up on my feet. Well, I guess now post-COVID era, it's more sitting in this chair. But either way, I like interacting with judges and other lawyers.
Yeah, the courtroom sounds to be replaced by Zoom nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you said what you like, and it's definitely a more active area of law. But what do you think is the thing that you dislike the most about your field?
What I dislike is probably the time pressures with any private practice, which is what I'm in, and I think any lawyer will have these same constraints. You have a lot of complex issues, and you have a lot of clients, and trying to balance and manage all of your clients can be very challenging. It can be stressful because if you miss a deadline, you open yourself up for professional negligence claims, which is what keeps a lot of lawyers up at night, because no one wants to be sued because they missed an important deadline. So being organized and making sure you know what the rules are so you don't miss a date a document should be filed is very important. But that's probably part, I think any lawyer would agree, is time. If we had infinite time, we would be able to devote more attention to all of our clients because they're people and people are emotional. But when you have 50 different clients who all need your help now, you've got to make sure you manage your time effectively. And that's a part that I would say I don't necessarily dislike, but it's the hardest part of a lawyer's job. And you will, I guess, dislike it as times if you're not organized, but as long as you stay organized, it's something you can manage. Never really enjoy.
Well, having said that, with your organization and like definitely time management being a big part of your day, what is your typical day-to-day life?
Yeah. So, uh, typical day is spent, I'd say a large part is drafting emails and I would say important correspondence. So, what I would call an important correspondence would be a letter that's responding to um, questions raised by another lawyer or putting forth your client's position inside that letter so that it's clear to the other side what your intentions are, what you're bringing in action for, what you're threatening to bring in action for, what kind of information you need to properly evaluate the claim. If there's documentation that your client doesn't have, it says it's in the other side's possession. So a lot of what my day is just trying to gather all the different pieces of the puzzle together, examine each one very carefully so you can start to put the picture together. Uh, Very rarely, if at all, do you ever have a client that comes to you with all the answers. They usually have a problem, and you're there to try to help go about getting the information to address the problem. So that's what I would say the largest part of my day is corresponding with clients, corresponding with lawyers, getting all the evidence that you need to properly inform yourself about the claim you're putting forth for your client. And then after that, putting it in a letter. And if you're not getting anywhere, you ultimately put it in a claim and you start an action. So that's the most common work. Of course, you have the more traditional stuff, such as going to trial when that happens, going to an appearance before a judge for a motion or some other kind of interlocutory hearing. But those ones happen less frequently, but mostly correspondence.
And what about you every day you have probably different clients, but do you feel like you have a typical client that you would have?
I guess the typical client would either be one who's, for my medical malpractice personal injury part, that'll be someone who's harmed by the negligence of a doctor or a nurse. So those ones are people who tend to be more severely disabled for as a result of some serious harm. Could be a surgery that went poorly, a misdiagnosis, a lack of informed consent. So they have serious issues with their day-to-day lives. For personal injury, those are your typical motor vehicle accident, slip and fall cases. They're your average person, but the largest part of my practice right now is estate litigation, and I tend to deal with a lot of elderly people who are having issues with capacity, or their children who have concerns about their elderly aging parents' capacity. So the clients vary significantly, but I guess if I were to summarize it, in my estate litigation practice, it's people who are dealing with aging parents or parents who have passed, and there's conflicts arising from how their estate should be administered. And on the personal injury med mal side, it's injured people and how you can get them compensation for the damages they suffered as a result of someone else's negligence.
So, you have so many different areas of practice. It's a very diverse like portfolio. Do you feel like you enjoy one area more than the other or tend to work in one area more than the other?
Yeah, I never thought, even in the first couple of years of practicing as a lawyer, that I would have a bit more of a specialization, if you will, in estate litigation. When I first started off, it was a mixed bag of litigation. So I took anything that was litigation based because that's what a lot of junior lawyers do. But you get to choose more as you become more competent. And really, the estate litigation is interesting to me because it's an interesting area of law. I get to apply my psychology background in estate litigation more so than medical malpractice and personal injury. I work with psychologists to diagnose people with whether or not they're capable of executing wills, if they're capable of giving instructions on their property or their personal care. And it's an interesting area when you're dealing with capacity, which I think is one of it's unique to estate litigation. It's a little bit more emotional in estate litigation because oftentimes you're dealing with long time family issues with siblings who don't get along, or siblings who are trying to take advantage of their parents, be it financially is usually the case. So it can be emotionally charged. So that's where client management comes in. Now, for medical malpractice, it tends to be more of a sophisticated area of law, and in terms of it's a very complex issues. You're looking at thousands of pages of medical documents. You're working with the best of the best who are providing you expert opinions on as to whether or not the doctor was negligent. So it's interesting to learn about different areas of medicine and to have to try to apply that to the law.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they all sound like very interesting areas, but definitely differ from each other. So, how do you feel like, do you feel like there are characteristics that a person has to have to do with like these specific areas of practice?
Yeah, as a litigator in general, I think an important personality type is you have to enjoy giving oral submissions. And for a lot of people, that's not something that they think they're naturally interested in doing. What I say to anyone going into law school and who is in law school is try and get involved in as many moots as possible. For those who are listening who aren't familiar with moots, I know I wasn't until I started law school. It's basically just a mock trial around fake set of facts that law schools put on, and perhaps U of T might do something similar for some of their students looking to go to law. I don't know, but getting that experience giving oral submissions in a practice setting is great, and you will quickly learn whether or not it's something that you really enjoy or whether it's something you say, you know what, it's really not for me. I think I'd rather stick with some other areas of law that don't require me to go to court. So once hey, you know what, I like giving oral submissions, I like standing up and advocating and putting on the robes and answering difficult questions from a judge, then you know that maybe civil litigation or litigation in general is the way for you. Now, how do you isolate that? Well, I think that really just comes with experience. When you work at a firm, you want to try as many different areas of law as you like, and you see what clicks with you. If you like family law, then maybe that's the way to go. If you like construction law, maybe it's estates litigation, maybe it's corporate commercial litigation, maybe it's medical malpractice. But once you start getting into the files, you'll have a sense what clicks with you and what you enjoy reading. Personally, I don't enjoy reading, lengthy contracts, which comes with corporate commercial litigation. But for some reason, I enjoy reading medical records more. Wouldn't have never known until I've had a chance to do both.
Well, it kind of comes from full circle with what you said at the beginning that you thought you would go into medicine and then, you didn't. So maybe it has to do with
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe that bit of background, and I think that
Yeah,
has something to do with it.
the interest came back. But so do you feel like there's a case in any of these areas of practice that has like really stuck with you and like throughout the years that you keep on thinking about, or
Like a legal case, like
yes?
one of my own or one that's famous.
Well, I mean, if you ever learned about one that you can't stop, thinking about it. I know I've learned a couple that I always have in my brain, but probably one that you've done yourself.
I'd say the one that sticks out in my mind was the first medical malpractice trial that I assisted as the senior lawyer at my firm with. And it lasted for 2 months. It was a long, grueling trial. And at that point, I was only just finishing up my, second year. So I wasn't contributing that much to the trial other than I was involved to assist where I could for the senior lawyer, and also to just try and learn the process. But it was a real eye opener for me. It was a lady who was, lost her fingers and toes as a result of an infection that occurred due to an eye infection. So she goes in the hospital with an eye infection, and then she comes out with no fingers and toes because the infection had spread throughout her body. So it was a tragic and unfortunate case, but it really taught me what trials were like, and it was the most serious trial that I've been in to date. So that one really sticks out in my mind.
Reasonably so, definitely. That's really, really tragic. Um, so definitely different direction, but usually we see things on, TV or on the media and stuff, and a lot of people have like these misconceptions of lawyers and like what it is to study law and like practice law. So do you feel like there are any myths that you want to debunk about like the legal career?
Um, it's a good question. The Well, there's a lot of time spent drafting materials, whether it be to go to a hearing or whether it be correspondence or agreements or any sorts of documents. So lawyers, the days of the trial lawyer who's standing up in the courthouse all day long, I think have gone, unless you're a criminal prosecuting lawyer, which you might be in the courthouse a lot more and on your feet, but I think that's rarer. We've moved to a much more we've moved to a system of written advocacy more so than oral advocacy. Not that it doesn't happen, but I was under the idea that when you become a lawyer, you're going to spend a lot of your time in the courtroom. It's typically not the case. And I've also learned that it's a good thing to not always be in the courtroom, because if you're not arguing in the courtroom, that means you're able to resolve things without a judge having to get involved. And it's like going to mom and dad when you have a problem. When two lawyers can't figure things out with each other, you go to the judge, and the judge is never happy when you're saying, we've got a problem, we can't solve it. We need you to solve it for us. So it's best, a lot of the advocacy is done with your client and with the other side. So I think that was a misconception for me. The lawyers are nice people. It's not a bunch of yelling in courthouses. It's not a bunch, while some lawyers can lose their temper, they tend to be the ones that aren't that good. Good lawyers are very calm, cool, collected, and they're kind people. They treat the other lawyers and everyone with a lot of respect. So I think that's a misconception. When you're doing a cross-examination, you don't find smoking guns all the time. It's not a big ploy to get someone trapped in a corner. The facts are usually such a way that there's real questions of doubt, and there's a lot of finding of fact. So it's a process more so than I'll solve it right away. I know all of the evidence and I'm going to prove to a judge this is the case. No, it takes years. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of educating yourself on the issues in your case, which not so much just standing up and advocating for your client.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that people are nice. Because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot from the media and, TV shows like Suits or something like that is like, oh, everyone's like mean and bad and. So that's a really good thing to hear. So next question is more about the advice. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give to, your younger self prior to going to law school or prior to even taking the LSAT?
The advice that I would give to my younger self would be to acquire as much experience, practical experience, as you can. Now, it's a very difficult thing to do as a student, and I appreciate that that's what a lot of people are going to say. And you say, well, I mean, if I'm lucky enough to have a family friend who's a lawyer, that's great. But a lot of us don't know lawyers. A lot of us have undergraduate degrees that aren't necessarily related to law, but they still want to go to law school, and that's all great. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I guess my point still stands. If you can research and talk and network and watch videos such as this, it's going to help you understand what lawyers do, because even in law school, law students don't know what lawyers do. They learn about the law. They haven't learned to be a lawyer. And it's not until you're a few years practicing as a lawyer that you'll start to understand the realities of what it's like. And I guess to go back to your question, I would say to myself, you know what? Call people up, find lawyers on the internet, look at their websites, read the biographies of lawyers in your area. Don't be afraid to email them. Don't be afraid to follow up if they don't respond. Call. Just ask them to go for coffee, and you'll be surprised at how many lawyers are willing to take an hour out of their day to meet with you. So if you have an interest in corporate law, find a corporate lawyer, email them, call them, and try to get that coffee meeting. Email 10 of them, 20 of them, however many you need. But ask them questions so they can tell you what it's like, and they'll probably show you around their office so you can see their day-to-days. Or if it's a human rights lawyer, or if it's a civil litigator, and say, hey, I'd really love to watch some advocacy. If next time you go to court, can I come and watch? They will likely say yes. And I know there's a fear that they say, oh, well, I'm an undergrad, why would they give me the time of day? Well, we've all been there. And I would tell myself, try to connect with strangers who work in the field you're interested in, because that's the best way to learn. Because otherwise, everything else read on the internet or reading from blogs or being told from a friend of a friend, that's just what from your understanding. Seeing it is really the important part. So Get out there, I guess, and don't be afraid to message other lawyers and learn about what they do. Lawyers love to talk about themselves like anyone else.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's really good advice. And definitely, I feel like that's a big part of like what we're trying to do here. And like why we really appreciate you coming here and like other lawyers coming on to talk with us, because it's really helpful for us students to hear about the day-to-days. And as you said, like learn what it is to really be a lawyer, because you can study the law, but it's very different from practicing it. At least that's what I've seen from, doing these interviews. So you already partially answered this question, but it is the last question. Do you think there is any other advice you would give for the up and coming generation of lawyers?
I'll do it in two parts, if you don't mind. I'll give it, the first part will be for people who are going to law school, undergrads who might be watching this video. And then the second part will be for law students who are going to be becoming lawyers soon. So for the undergrads who have applied or are thinking about applying, I know a big concern is, will I have the LSAT score? Will I have the marks? And if I don't get into a top tier university, will that affect my prospects of getting a job? And that was a huge concern for me. Now, what I've seen is I've interacted with many different lawyers now, and they're from all over the place. So if you go to, any law school in Canada is considered a top tier law school, just because we don't have many. So if you can get into a Canadian law school, that's awesome. They're all phenomenal. And everyone will hire anyone who has a law degree from any of those schools. And they'll also hire anyone who's had a law degree not from Canada. So I've seen people who are unsuccessful in the application, who've applied to law schools in the United Kingdom, law schools in the US and Australia. And while some might find there might be a stigma around going outside Canadian, it doesn't hold true. I would recommend anyone who wants to become a lawyer, you go to anywhere that will allow you to have a law degree, because after you start practicing, no one cares. No one's going to ask you where you got your law degree. And we have lawyers here that have a law degree from the UK, and they're phenomenal. I've been up against lawyers who have degrees from the US because they never got into Canada, and they're one of the best in the country. So don't worry so much about the grades and the LSAT score. Do your absolute best, but I've never seen anybody who've wanted to become a lawyer not become a lawyer because their grade or their LSAT score has been a barrier. It sometimes takes a couple times to apply. I got in the second time I applied, not the first, and because maturity is a big aspect for these schools that are hiring. They don't want someone who's like, well, I finished my undergrad, I don't know what else to do, so let's roll the dice. Okay, med school or law school? Law school it is. They want to see that this person actually wants to be a law lawyer. And that's where age and maturity is a big factor in terms of law schools hires. So you could have a low GPA, you could have a low LSAT score, but you could get in because you've shown that you want to be a lawyer, you know what being a lawyer is, and that will come across in your application material. So I tell undergrads that don't worry too much about your grades and your LSAT score. Do the best you can because it helps, but it's not the be all and end all. Get into any school you can get into. You'll have a great time regardless, and things will work out, and you'll have a successful career if being a lawyer is what you want to be. So that's what I say for undergrads. Now, for law students who've now decided that they're going to be a lawyer and they're in a school, the advice I'd give them is to be patient. You're used to being a big fish in a small pond when you're in school. Now you're a little fish in the ocean, where you've got other lawyers who've been doing this for 30 plus years. Experience counts for a lot. You can be smart, but there's a lot of smart people out there. It just takes time, practice, and experience. So it's going to be daunting at first because being a lawyer is hard, and you're going to feel like you're back in grade one all over again. And that's okay. So be patient with yourself and allow yourself a few years to just get good at what you're doing, and don't expect yourself to be even really competent until you've at least had a few years under your belt. Just be patient, learn, focus on learning, and don't get too caught up in trying to be perfect, because mental health is an important thing for people to consider. And I've seen a lot of lawyers leave the practice of law because they stress themselves out too much, because they take on too much work, they put unrealistic expectations on themselves, and they don't have support around them, being senior lawyers, family, friends, who can help them when they're second guessing their decisions.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful and just sound advice. And I think even the last thing that you said about, not stressing and putting mental health first and going things at your own pace is also helpful for other students as well, to not get up on the pressure of it all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you so much. I'm just gonna end the recording here. So thank you for everyone who tuned in. Thank you, David, for your time, for your answers and your advice. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.